Hello, everybody. Chip Paul here for Chip Talks podcast. So today I want to do something that I haven't done in a while. I've talked a lot to you guys about the endocannabinoid system, but I really want to do a kind of a deep dive on it today on how it really works inside of you. You know what it is, what drives it, how you can manipulate it, all those type things, because it's very confusing. It's I speak to people all the time about this system, and when I say the word endocannabinoid system, I can tell people immediately just kind of go to cannabis, right? And they go to marijuana, and they go to, they think I'm trying to sell them a marijuana product, or they think I'm trying to somehow warp their minds into a marijuana position or whatever. And I am an activist in marijuana, so I might try to do that in certain instances. But when I talk and speak about the endocannabinoid system, I'm not talking about cannabis as a medicine or plant. I'm talking about an internal system inside of you, and not just inside of you, but really inside of everything with a spine. So your dog has an endocannabinoid system, your lizard has an endocannabinoid system, your bird has an endocannabinoid system. Most life on the planet, in fact, anything with a spine has an endocannabinoid system, and it's even way more vast than that. Arguably, we sort of were created from the ground up. So mitochondria were little, critters that got gobbled up by another critter, and then they became the little powerhouse inside of that critter. Even a mitochondria will have an endocannabinoid receptor and would have to, because mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cell. And so if the endocannabinoid system really is our master regulatory system, and that's what it's looking to be, then it would have to be involved with energy status and being able to control basically how energetic you are at any given time. So times we have to dial the dial up. If you're being chased by a bear, whoop, that dial needs to be dialed up. And if you're, comfortable, fat, dumb, and happy in your luxury condo, then you can, dial that down a little bit, right? So anyway, but we need to be able to control mitochondria in that way. And in the endocannabinoid system, as our master regulatory system, would have to have a hook to mitochondria, and it does, which is really cool. So what does this system do? Let's talk about that real quick, because it literally, if you study this system, it is involved with every single regulatory process in our body. So like, you might be a cancer researcher, like, let's say, and you might be really familiar with, let's pick an inflammation pathway. It's not necessarily associated with cancer, it's associated with all inflammation, but TLR4. Okay, so TLR4 is an inflammation pathway. Well, is the endocannabinoid system involved in TLR4 inflammation? Yeah. Any kind of immune response is going to involve the endocannabinoid system, because any kind of immune response is going to involve, let's say, immune mediators. Where do immune mediators come from? They come from your bone. They come from stem cells in your bone. How does your bone know how much stem cell to express, and kind of how does it regulate and control stem cells? Through the endocannabinoid system. Once a stem cell is made, how is it differentiated? Meaning, does it become an immune mediator, or is it a repair item, or what is it going to be? That is the endocannabinoid system. Okay. So the endocannabinoid system, if you're a doc out there and you're going, well, what does this have to do with cancer or inflammation pathways or anything? Well, it's a step up, doc. It's a step up. It's a regulatory step up, and it's going to regulate how many B cells and how many T cells, and what that differentiation looks like at the stem cell level, and how rapidly those stem cells are coming out of bone, and if you're having osteoporosis or not. So all that kind of next step up is being regulated by the endocannabinoid system. Is that important? Yes. My gosh, if you have mastery over, let's say, stem cell differentiation, well, then you can steer and drive your immune system in maybe, ways that it needs to be directed. You can do all different kinds of things inside the human body if you have control over the endocannabinoid system. So it's involved with everything. It's involved with when you eat, right? So every day, at about 10 o'clock, Zeitbringer +3 and Zeitbringer +9. So what does that mean? It means about 3 hours after you wake up and about 9 hours after you wake up. And, 9, 10 o'clock, for most of us, maybe 11 o'clock, but ZT3 or after the sun comes up. So what happens is in your stomach, you start expressing CB1 neuroreceptors and they kind of pop up like little mushrooms in your stomach. And it's just because it's kind of time to do this. You do this every day at the same time. So you'll pop up these little CB1 neuroreceptors. And these guys they have action and you kind of feel them a little bit. But what these guys feel like is what we mistake as hunger. Okay. So that little rumbling in your tummy and the stuff that you feel at like 10 o'clock and maybe 3 or 4 o'clock, 2 o'clock, that's not hunger. That's your endocannabinoid system just expressing itself. When you really get hungry, pop, 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 you feel that in your throat. But anyway, that happens, every day, kind of at the same time. Doesn't mean you need to eat. It means that, if you wanted to eat, it might be a good time. So that's all that it means. But it does not mean that you have to eat or need to eat. Again, you can go 40 days without eating. So the endocannabinoid system we're very aware of. Again, how do we control and we'll talk more about this, but fight or flight reaction, right? So we have a fight or flight reaction and you're built to react, right? So I don't have to regulate you much. Like the endocannabinoid system isn't necessarily involved in some of the unwinds that we do, some of the reactions that we do, because you're just built to do that. You're sort of if I'm going to build a system or build a vehicle, I've got to kind of build a default, a baseline, let's say, and your baseline is very reactionary. But it's controllable, and we'll talk about that in a second, because again, this is important. This is important for all of us to know. It's important for Joe Blow to know, definitely, because again, you can control your health through these principles that I'm going to kind of talk to you about and teach you. But we have to start kind of with this baseline of the endocannabinoid system. If you're a physician, you really need to know this. I mean, it's not like you've been mistaught, but it's like you haven't been given the full picture for sure. And you've been taught, like, let's say symptoms and then reactions to those symptoms that might alleviate the symptom, but it's not going to alleviate the cause of the symptom. So when we get into this endocannabinoid system, we begin to talk about causation, and you'll see that as I walk you through kind of how it's fueled. If you're a researcher here, there's all you can eat, my friend. So dive in and help, please. There's so many ways to take this research, and you have to wonder if the pharmaceutical industry is doing any of this. And I know they are to some degree, but there's sort of gotchas in all this research that if they pursue it and really sort of bring out drugs, they're going to highlight things that they don't want you to know right now. It's not in their business interest, let's say, to have and pharma inherently is, full of good people really trying to do good things. But there are certainly people who are agenda driven and narrative driven in pharma and have used the pharmaceutical industry to do that, really to drive an agenda down your throat and a narrative down your throat, and kind of a problem reaction solution where, we create a health crisis or a health problem, let's say high blood pressure, high cholesterol. We create a solution like statin drugs, and problem solved, right? Well, there never really was a problem. So that's been done to you, let's say, a few different times. But anyway, we won't spend time there. Let's spend time on solutions. So this endocannabinoid system, again, it's our master regulatory system. So it's involved in every single regulatory process that your body has. And it might be not down in the weeds, but it's up here, definitely involved in everything. So how does it work, right? So how do I, does it have knobs and levers and bells and whistles that are used to regulate us? Yeah, absolutely. And you can think of kind of the biggest thing that your body does is it in your biggest, let's say, reactionary thing. So if you have something attack your body or you see something that's not you, you're going to do one of two things. So you're going to inflame or you're going to deflame. All right. And those are tendencies that we set on our own by our eating behavior, which is really cool. But there are tendencies in the endocannabinoid system. And we're going to see that as we talk about how we feed and fuel this system. I'm trying to think about if I've missed anything really about how it works, but it's so common to life. I mean, the first thing really to develop a spine is something called a sea squirt, but a sea squirt is a sponge, but it's the larva phase of a sea squirt, and it has a little tail, and it'll kind of move to the next rock and form a new sea squirt. Well, the larva has an endocannabinoid system. So, anything with a spine will have an endocannabinoid system. That's how common it is. All right. So now let's talk about how we feed it and fuel it. And then we'll talk about kind of what we're doing wrong. Okay. So let me pull up this, and it's going to take me a little while to flip kind of back and forth between these little slides. So bear with me, but we'll pull this one up right now. So this is basically just saying that, what feeds the endocannabinoid system. And it turns out that there's an enzyme called NAPLD. And NAPLD is an enzyme that's in our intestinal lumen, but it's the enzyme that creates endocannabinoids. Okay. So what does it create them from? Well, it creates them from fat. And this is just indicating that a high fat diet will cause an increase in endocannabinoids, which is true. But I just really want you to see that again, basically fats are what create endocannabinoids. All right. And so let's pull up another one here. And again, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to bear with me for a second. So this is some research that was done by a friend of mine, and her name is Dr. Artemis Simopoulos. So Artemis and I have had several conversations about the endocannabinoid system and about omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids and kind of what they do in the system and how they work and all that. But Artemis has been right. Artemis is let's say, the genesis of the Mediterranean diet. So you'll recall back in, let's say, the 80s and 90s when we were like, oh, the Mediterranean diet is the greatest thing in the world. Well, how did we know that? Dr. Artemis Simopoulos' research. So she's been very deep into omega-3 and omega-6 research for a long, long, long time. I'm going to read you this. I might not read you all of it, but I just want to read you this because I think it's so important. And again, this is from her research in 2006. So it's not like this is new. She has been writing about this since the 90s. So it's not like this is new stuff. But I want this to really impact you. And then we'll tie this right back into the endocannabinoid system. But again, the endocannabinoid system is fed by dietary fat. All right. Saturated fat builds a class of endocannabinoids. Monounsaturated fat builds a class of endocannabinoids. Omega-3s build a class of endocannabinoids, and we'll talk a lot more about those in a second. And omega-6s build a class of endocannabinoids. Those are all separate and distinct. And when you eat dietary fat, what happens is as those endocannabinoids get built in our intestinal lumen, it sends feedback through the vagal afferent nerve to our hypothalamus hippocampus. And we get a sense when we're eating of our nutritional state as to the endocannabinoid system. Fats are the most important thing that you put in your mouth. And again, the type of fat and the ratios of those types of fats are super important to this endocannabinoid system. And we're going to dive down that rabbit hole right here. Okay, so first of all, why are omega-3? There's lots of research on omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, not so much research on the endocannabinoid system because it appears to be something that you can't see or, know about or, so it'd be great if we just had this one study that, laid out everything that I'm talking about, but we don't have that yet. I'll likely, hopefully write that paper in the future that will kind of describe this better in a peer-reviewed manner. And I intend on doing that very, very soon, but I'm not quite done yet. So we've still got a little bit of things to discover and figure out. But let me read you this. And this is omega-3 and omega-6 and why they're important. And again, this is not new. This is 20 years old. So several sources of information suggest that human beings evolved on a diet with a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 essential fatty acids, EFAs, of 1 to 1, basically. Whereas in Western diets, the ratio is 15 to 1, meaning 15 omega-6 fatty acids for every 1 omega-3 fatty acids, to 16.7 to 1. And this is far worse now. It's 40 to 1 now. Western diets are deficient in omega-3 fatty acids and have excess amounts of omega-6 fatty acids compared with a diet on which human beings evolved. So we've moved away from our native state. Okay. So, you know what happens to a deer when you bring it into captivity, or a bear or any animal? They get sick. They get sick not because of being in captivity. They get sick because of the food that we feed them. In the wild, again, a deer's not going to get cancer in the wild. The deer doesn't get IBS or Crohn's or autoimmunes or any of the crap we get. It just doesn't happen in the wild. So what this is saying is the wild way that we should eat should be a ratio of about 1 to 1. Okay. So we have excess amounts of omega-6 fatty acids compared with a diet on which human beings evolved and their genetic patterns were established. We moved away from kind of how we established our, let's say, baseline or our core function with these fatty acids. Excessive amounts of omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids are very, and a very high omega-6 omega-3 ratio, as is found in today's Western diets, promote the pathogenesis of many diseases, including cardiovascular disease, cancer, and inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. Whereas increased levels of omega-3 PUFAs, a lower omega-6 omega-3 ratio, exert suppressive efforts. In the secondary prevention of cardiovascular disease, a ratio of 4 to 1, 4 omega-6 to 1 omega-3, was associated with a 70% decrease in total mortality. What? If I have heart disease, I just need to up my omega-3s, and I've got a 70% chance of decreasing my mortality? Sold. A ratio of 2.5 to 1 reduced rectal cell proliferation in patients with colorectal cancer, whereas a ratio of 4 to 1 with the same amount of omega-3 PUFA had no effect. So again, closer to 1 to 1, baby. That's where we need to be. A ratio of 2 to 3 to 1 suppressed inflammation in patients with rheumatoid arthritis. What? The solution to my rheumatoid arthritis could be just eat more omega-3s? Yes, and you'll find out why in a second when I tie all this together for you. The big reveal, the big surprise. The lower omega-6 omega-3 ratio in women with breast cancer, again, so more omega-3s, less omega-6s with breast cancer, was associated with a decreased risk. A ratio of 2 to 3 to 1 suppressed inflammation in patients with rheumatoid arthritis. Oh, I already read that. Sorry. We had that one. 5 to 1 beneficial effect on patients with asthma, whereas a ratio of 10 to 1 had adverse consequences. So if you've got asthma, 5 to 1 is going to help you. 10 to 1 is going to hurt you. 40 to 1, which is about where we are now, is really going to hurt you. These studies indicate that optimal ratio may vary with disease under consideration. This is consistent with the fact that chronic diseases are multigenic and multifactorial. Therefore, it is quite possible that a therapeutic dose of omega-3 fatty acids will depend on the degree of severity of diseases. Disclaimers are there. So we've had our disclaimers in the study. But isn't that interesting? Again, so there's lots of research that says that omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, when you eat them in the proper ratios, again, they are going to really help your health. And if you don't eat them in the proper ratios, they're going to really hurt your health. I want this one. Wow. Okay, so as you eat omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, I'll kind of walk you through this part first, and then we'll walk you through this study. But as you eat omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, what happens is you set up omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. Omega-6s are inflammatory. Okay. So if your ratio is more omega-6 than omega-3, and it's close to 1 to 1, you're going to set a little bit of an inflammatory state. Okay. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it this way real quick. So you're going to set up a little bit of an inflammatory state. Let's say you're, 2 to 1. So 2 omega-6s to 1 omega-3, a little bit of an inflammatory state. If you're 4 to 1, it's going to be a little bit more of an inflammatory state. If you're 6 to 1, it's going to be more. If you're 40 to 1, like we are right now, you're set at the most inflammatory state you can possibly be in. Now, the more that you, let's say, deviate this ratio from 1 to 1 to up here to 40 to 1, it's like winding a spring. So we all are familiar with like how we react, right? So we react in certain ways, and this comes from the cellular all the way up. So if I hit a cell, let's say at this, we already talked about TLR4. So if I hit a cell at TLR4, it's going to start this inflammation process inside of that cell. It's sensitive, right? And it's sensitive around that receptor. If I hit that receptor, bam, things happen. The cell reacts, okay? So you're designed in the same way. You're designed to react. And again, I can give you examples of this. So fight or flight, right? So something happens behind you that scares you, bam, you're going to, react. You're going to have a reaction to that. That reaction will be gated. That reaction will be managed by something called the endocannabinoid system, because it's your master regulatory system. So it's going to help you do that. It's going to help you react. It's not really responsible for the reaction, but it's going to help you react. But it is going to be majorly responsible for how you dial back that reaction. So, if you think about a fight or flight reaction, and, you need to understand, is it a bear coming behind you and I need to run and really get away? Or is it, somebody who just walked up behind me and went boo? So as I understand that, I bring back that reaction. However, what happens right now, because this ratio is so whacked out, because we're so inflammatory and our spring is wung so tight, we don't manage those basically pullback reactions very well. So we may have lingering anxiety, lingering depression, all kinds of mental things that happen to us around an improper, let's say, fight or flight response, and our inability to pull that back. Again, the answers to this are great. They're really easy. Balance the ratio, and great things happen. And again, a lot of things will clear up. Let's just put it that way. The other thing that is involved here is pain. And so you think about, your pain reaction, right? You touch a hot stove and ow, you move away and you're like not going to touch that again. Well, because we're so whacked out, your fingers shouldn't hurt, unless you really burn them. But most of the time we don't. That's why we pull away. But your fingers shouldn't hurt, let's say 2 weeks after you touch the hot stove. But yet that happens to a lot of us. So I have lingering back pain. I hurt my back, 30 years ago, right? So no, that's like a immanaged, pain response. It's not being pulled back in kind of the way that it should. Okay, we're done. You don't need to repair anymore. You're out of pain. All good. Okay. So we're winding this spring by our inattention to our omega-3 and our omega-6 fatty acid balance. Our spring is rung up as tight as it can be rung up. And what is a source of omega-6s that really causes this, that we eat all the time? Corn. Corn is in everything. And corn is a, huge source of omega-6 fatty acids. So corn is just, where the omega-6s are coming from. It's okay to eat corn. I'm not demonizing corn by any means, but you need to offset that, omega-6 with the same amount of omega-3. Where do you find omega-3s? Chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts. Walnuts are about the only nut that is a strong source of omega-3. Acorns have omega-3, a lot of omega-3 in them, but we don't eat those anymore. Chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds are the best way. And those are, where do you find those? Baking aisle. How do you use them? Put them in any food. Hemp seeds are kind of sweet. Chia seeds are the best thing because they're a strong source of omega-3. But they don't have a lot of taste, which is kind of a nice thing. Okay, so let's bring up this little study. And again, if you're listening audio wise, you're not seeing this. So I'll kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at. But basically, we're looking at this emerging class of omega-3 fatty acid endocannabinoids. So when I eat omega-3 fatty acids, what types of endocannabinoids are built from omega-3s? And this is the stuff that we're deficient in right now. So it's, if you look at the main health problem that we have, it's this disbalance of omega-3 to omega-6 fats. And because we have that, we set this strong inflammatory state, and you're so reactionary and so inflammatory, it's hard to dial you back from that. 80% of us die of some inflammatory disease, heart, whatever. And again, is it fixable? Yes. Balance. And why? Because of the endocannabinoid system, because we are basically programming our bodies with omega-3 and omega-6 fats. So if I told you you work like a computer and you're going to program your body with omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, would that cause you to pay more attention? I'm trying to figure out a way to get you guys to pay more attention here, because this is such an important thing, right? And I talk about it. I know I talk about it again and again and again, but the reason that I do is because it's so important. So let's look at these different endocannabinoids that are built from omega-3 fatty acids, and kind of what they do. Are they important? So our first one, right off the bat, and there are 8 of them, by the way. There may even be 9 of them, but I think there are 8 of them. So something called synaptamide. I like him. I think I want a lot of him. But synaptamide is a very important thing that's built from omega-3 fatty acids, and is very important in your brain, in how you kind of run and manage inflammation and other things in your brain. There are also derivatives that get formed, omega-3s, with serotonin and dopamine. And this is super important in signaling. So these guys get formed. And again, they're going to signal both in the endocannabinoid system and into the dopamine system if they're a dopamine guy, or into the serotonin system if they're a serotonin guy. So serotonin is our fine motor system. And again, I guess we can talk about this as a regulatory system, because it's all over science. So if you're a doc or a researcher or whatever, you learned about serotonin, and you learned that it was kind of your motor control. So if you need to blink your eyes, it's serotonin. If I'm moving things, it's serotonin, right? So serotonin, serotonin, serotonin. But in order for the endocannabinoid system to have control, regulatory control over that, and it would have to have regulatory control over your motor, it would have to have regulatory control over the serotonin system. And guess what? It does. But guess what? If you're not eating omega-3s, you're not making these guys. You're not making these very, very important control elements that are needed to really run very important things inside of our body. So like DHEA is one of the things that is made. And again, is this affected? Let's say, is DHEA affected? The brain level affected? Does this matter? If you eat omega-3s, do you increase all these guys? Yeah, directly. Okay. So this isn't a pig, I think, but 9.5-fold increase in piglet brain from DHA supplementation. Synaptic activity induced in hippocampal neurons. Neurite growth increased 10-fold greater than DHA, and this is DHEA, which is the endocannabinoid breakdown of omega-3 fatty acids. The neurite growth increased 10-fold greater than just DHA on its own. 50 to 100-fold more effective than DHA in differentiating NSCs. Not sure what those are. Stem cells, likely. But you can kind of see the benefits here of the endocannabinoid version of DHA versus, DHA itself. Reduced inflammation here, kind of better immune response, and cancer, you're getting some very good activity. MCF7 is breast cancer cells, and so inhibits proliferation. So that's a pretty good result. So we want these things, right? And again, if you're not eating omega-3s, if you're like, oh, well, Chip, but I don't eat omega-3s, I don't even know what they are. Well, guess what? You're not making this stuff. Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are the only two essential fatty acids that we have to have. So your body can't make them. Your body can't make all these breakdowns of this omega-3 fatty acid that are endocannabinoids without having the omega-3 precursor. So we have to, not only every day, every meal, okay, we should work on balancing this omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid balance. Yeah. So let's go back over here. And again, I think you can see that the endocannabinoid system is vast. Again, it has to work somewhat like a computer, okay? And so it has to understand, well, kind of what is a baseline? So where am I going to be at as far as inflammation and deflammation? And then how tight am I going to be wound up as far as reaction status? So am I going to react quick and strong? Am I going to kind of have a weaker reaction, that's not so dramatic and immune involving, let's just say. So right now, why do we need immunosuppressants when we're sick, right? Why would an immunosuppressant help you with a virus, with COVID? How does that make sense, right? I want to suppress your immune system so I can help you fight this virus. What is that about? Spring is wound tight, reactionary, and you're reacting to everything. So your body can't fight COVID if you're reacting to everything. You're reacting to that, but you're reacting to the dust particles in your nose, okay? You're sending immune mediators like crazy for the dust, as many as you are for the COVID, because you're so tightly wound up. Oh, we need to bring that more back down to a 1-to-1, because then we're not so reactionary. Our bodies have time to adjust, to think, to do what they need to do. We're not like a tight wound spring. So a lot about the endocannabinoid system, but also a lot about really what's going on with us right now. Again, next time you walk through the grocery store, find omega-3s, ready, go. And you're going to have to go to walnuts. You're going to have to go to the seed aisle, the baking aisle. That's it. Find omega-6s. They're everywhere. They're in this cereal that you eat. They're in fillers. They're in every corn syrup. Corn. Start reading labels. They're everywhere. Whop! You're majorly disbalanced in your food sources. Everything that you eat. Pay attention to your omega-3s. Start eating more omega-3s. Be kind to your endocannabinoid system. This is more important. Omega-3s are a more important supplement right now where we're at in the endocannabinoid system than anything from cannabis, anything that cannabis ever could do. Okay? So that important. All right. See you guys. Hopefully you like this one. A lot of information here. So spread her around. See you later. Bye.